Okay, we are live.
Yay!
I'm so excited for this live show. So, everyone who's joining, thank you so much. I'm here today, of course, with the lovely Morgan, and we're going to be talking about what I believe is both of our favourite Jane Austen novel, and I think personally her best one, and that is, of course, Emma, which is just an absolute masterpiece, and I can't wait to dive into it with you. So really excited for this one. But before we dive in and start talking all about Austen, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself? Your channel is linked down below, so I'm sure a lot of you already know Morgan, but if not, go and subscribe and find her down below. But yeah, feel free to introduce yourself.
I'd love to. Hello, everyone. I'm Morgan, and I have a YouTube channel, and I talk about books, but also just general lifestyle things. And I think we all share an affinity for reading, especially classics. I'd say that classics or classic literature is my favorite overall genre. And Jane Austen, of course, is just such a staple of that genre. So
absolutely. I feel like Jane Austen just encompasses something so wonderful. She really just creates this incredible world. And whereas I love classical literature as well, but where other classics can feel a little bit heavy or they can take a lot of effort to get through, I find Jane Austen to just be a very much breath of fresh air in the classic genre. So very excited for that. Another thing I think we share an affinity for is tea. So I was wondering what flavour tea are you drinking today?
I am drinking peppermint.
Ooh, delightful.
You...
I'm drinking one. Well, I don't actually know what it was. So one of my tea advent calendars has names that don't really tell you the flavour. So this one was called Post Party Refresh, and I think it has mint and black currant or blackberry in it. So it's very refreshing, very tasty.
Yeah, I love mint, black raspberry. I love the combination. So that sounds really good.
It is very tasty. If anyone else is drinking a hot drink while we're watching this live show, then definitely let us know in the comments. And a lot of people are excited to see you.
I also, before we move on, I know that this is your channel and you're hosting this, but I would love for you to be able to introduce yourself for the people that might be coming from.
Okay, very nice, like a role reversal. Okay, well, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Kira, and I have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about books and also about some of my other favourite things, namely tea and food, and also just general lifestyle. So lots of cozy vibes here on this channel.
Yeah, she's prolific. She also has a podcast too.
Yeah, I'm sometimes I'm oh, I've taken on too much. But yeah, I have also got a food channel because while I love food a lot, I appreciate that's not everyone's cup of tea. So I made a channel where I can just wholly talk about food. And then also I am a yoga teacher, so I have a yoga channel as well, which I need to give a little bit more attention to be honest.
Well, I'm impressed that you even have one. And you're vegan as well, right?
I am, yes, yeah. For I think it'll be 6 years in February. So
oh my gosh, that's amazing! I'm coming up on 5 years.
Amazing. I love I mean, I'm sure we've got different things available in the UK to the US, but I'm sure you've had the same just boom of vegan options over the last couple of years, compared to, I'm assuming, when we both went vegan around the same time. There was options, but it was nowhere near what it is now. So
very different. Yes.
Yeah.
So much better.
This sounds delicious. Spicy pumpkin tea.
Yeah.
Very nice. And then a strawberry and elderflower, and wrapping the coffee with an Americano. Love it.
I wonder what time it is there.
I know, yeah. So fun. I love these live shows. I think the first time I did a live show, at the end we talked about where everyone was from, and there was such a range of time zones. It's kind of wild. So we're both in completely different time zones. It's 8 p.m. for me, and for you it is midday.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay, so let's start talking about Jane Austen. I always like to start these live shows by talking a little bit more generally about Jane Austen before we dive into the specific book. So I'd love to know, how many of her books have you read, if you haven't read all of them? And if you have read all of them, what is your favourite? Or do you have a ranking system? Do you have a least favourite? Just tell me it all.
Oh, I would love to. So I have read all of them. I finished reading her complete novels this year, and I've even read a little the Sanditon incomplete.
Ooh.
But my Jane Austen has been with me throughout my 20s. I'm 26, so I feel like I've read her novels during a pivotal time in my life, and I really want to reread them. I know you've reread, you're like actively reading them, but recently, like I read Emma in 2020, I think it was, and just fell in love. Emma is definitely my favorite. She ranks number one. I read Pride and Prejudice when maybe I was 20 years old, and I feel like I would have a different appreciation for it. That and Sense and Sensibility were the first two that I read. But I would rank it Emma, then probably Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. I remember reading Northanger Abbey, and it completely went over my head that it was kind of like satire.
Yeah.
So I didn't enjoy it as much, but I would love to reread it with that perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, and then Mansfield Park. I know that's the one that you just reviewed. I think that might be my bottom ranker. However, I love them all.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you have to have like a favorite and a least favorite, but it's not like you're saying that the least favorite is a bad book because she is just so talented. I feel like I've had a similar Austen experience. So I think probably I read Northanger Abbey when I was maybe like about 18. That was the first Jane Austen that I'd read, and at the time I was deciding to do an English literature degree, and the book that prompted me to do it was not Northanger Abbey. It was Frankenstein, and I was like big on Gothic literature at the time. So I feel like I was a bit like off put by like the fact that she was making fun of the Gothic genre and that like the whole satire is about that. So I didn't not like it, but I wasn't like obsessed. And then I didn't read another Jane Austen novel until my third year of university when I read Persuasion for one of my classes. And I think Persuasion at the time I didn't love because I felt like it was a bit dry, and I think studying it as well just like took a little bit of the joy out of it for me. I didn't read anything else by Jane Austen for quite a while, and I also read Emma last year, and it completely changed my perspective on Jane Austen. And I think maybe I just didn't have like a sophisticated enough view of reading when I first read her books to like appreciate how like funny she is and the fact that it is like a lot about wit and satire. So I read Emma, loved it. Then I read Sense and Sensibility, loved that as well. And then that kind of prompted me to want to reread them all and then read Mansfield Park for the first time because that was the only one I hadn't read. So ranking wise, I think I would probably say Emma is absolutely first. Then it would be, I think now Pride and Prejudice is my second favourite. Then Sense and Sensibility. Then Northanger Abbey. Then I think probably Mansfield Park. Then Persuasion last. But equally, I haven't read Persuasion in so long, and that is like one of the next ones up. So maybe that will change things.
Yeah. So about the same. And I'd say that I have a very similar experience. There was just something about reading Emma where it clicked for me. Like Emma is the first novel of Jane Austen's where I was able to appreciate her humor. It's so funny, and it was just like a easier, more enjoyable read, whereas I had to try harder with the other ones, or just was lost on me because I was so lost in the language. I might have not noticed just the feeling of it. And the narrator, I love her narrative voice. It's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. It is like, I think it just took that one book to be like so in your face funny for me to then realize like how clever she could be, and then going back and rereading them has just like changed everything. But yeah, I think if I'd have like not picked up Emma, I might never have really like properly experienced Jane Austen, which is kind of wild to think because now she's probably one of my favorite authors.
I know.
I feel like we would probably both agree on this, but which book should you read first if you haven't read one by Jane Austen? I would say Emma.
Well, somebody actually asked me that in my most recent video in the comments section, and I suggested Pride and Prejudice. Emma is my favorite, but there has to be a reason why Pride and Prejudice is so widely loved. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was my entry point into Austen's novels. And there's so many movie adaptations and like the mini series. You have a lot to enjoy along with it.
Yeah, that is true. I feel like I think about this all the time, and we have had a discussion about this on one of the live shows, but to think about why Pride and Prejudice is the most popular, and is it because it's the best, or is it like a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where like it was
Right.
adapted so many times, and then, you know, I feel like it's got to be a bit of both, because it is a really great novel, but equally I don't necessarily think it's like better than Emma. I just think it somehow, like, I think probably it's like her most classically like romantic, in the sense of like the enemies to lovers situation with Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, and it is like it's a fun concept to be transformed into TV, I think. So
I think it like encompasses all the Jane Austen tropes. Like it has a bit of everything that her other novels have, like as far as the different degrees of protagonists. Like Lizzie Bennet is very independent and admirable, but she also is like middle class, whereas Emma's high class and very unrelatable for most. And
yeah, that is true.
there's a lot of different pieces, so it's like a good representation of everything. Emma is a unique experience. I feel like it's a comedy first and foremost, perhaps. And I do see Pride and Prejudice as more romantic, and it is funny. It has those funny elements.
It is. I'd say the two of them, Emma and Pride and Prejudice, are her funniest novels, like in the sense that they like bring a lot of like wit, and there are like characters whose pretty much sole purpose, I think, is to add like a humorous element. And so they're fun, and I think they surprise people who are coming to it expecting like a like stuffy classic, and then they just get like this really fun experience. So either of them, I'd say, to start with. The only one I'd say probably Mansfield Park and Persuasion would be the two that I'd say absolutely do not start with, because while there's stuff to appreciate in them, they're not like as fun as some of her other ones.
I'm very glad that those were the last two that I read when I already had my foundation in Jane Austen. But thank you so much for your question, Steffi.
And this one is quite fun. The closest I've gotten to Jane Austen is Pride, Prejudice and Zombies. And I did not know there was one called Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters.
Somebody recently recommended that for Landon, because he says he's going to read a Jane Austen novel. Landon is my significant other, if you're not familiar with my channel and my videos, but
I'd be interested to hear his review on that. That'll be fun. Interestingly, it was actually Jay, my boyfriend, who read Emma just before me, and he was like, I think you'll really like this, and then like told me to read it, and that's the only Jane Austen he's ever read, so shout out to Jay. But yeah, so I feel like we've had a bit of a warm up to Austen, as always. I'd love to know your thoughts on Jane Austen, and if you have a favourite. Some of you have been leaving. Pride and Prejudice is quite commonly a favourite, and rightly so. It is a great one. So without further ado, let's dive into our thoughts on Emma. I like to start generally with like a bit of a spoiler-free section where we can just kind of talk about like thoughts on the book, any favourite characters, anything about the structure that you particularly like, and then we can dive into the more in-depth thoughts after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Fabulous. So do you have a favourite character?
Oh, well, I have to say, Emma, I want to be unique and not cliched, but Emma is most definitely my favorite character. However, when you asked me that question, it was Emma, Harriet, and Mr. Knightley that all came to mind. However,
absolutely. I also love Emma, because I just think she is my favorite Austen protagonist, and the reason for that is because she's not necessarily always likable. For example, when I like compare her to Fanny Price from Mansfield Park, who's just like so like moral and perfect and just like led by good reason, I'm like, I don't relate to that because I'm not 100% perfect. Whereas Emma, she, you know, she can be judgmental, she can be a little bit rude or thoughtless, and I think while she grows and like the novel is about her development and her awareness of herself, I think that's something that is relatable to a lot of people. Like we do have to work on becoming a better version of ourselves. It doesn't necessarily come like 100% naturally to everyone. So I think that's why I love Emma as a protagonist.
Yeah, she really does. She's confident. She has it all. She's determined to never be dependent on another person. And still, even with that like stubbornness, she's able to evolve and grow throughout the novel, and that's makes her even more likable. But I related so much to her. She reminded me of my like senior year of high school, freshman year of college or university self, or just that young naivety where you think the world is your oyster, which it is, but you have this like cocky confidence. Not all of us have that, but just that youthful ignorance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the feeling I think that comes with like finishing like your primary education, that like you feel like you've like conquered something and you have gained all this knowledge and you've like achieved something incredible, which you have. And it's not to say that that's not an amazing achievement, but I think you're so unaware of how much more there is left to learn in like a life experience, which is something that you literally can only gain with that experience. And no matter how many people older than you tell you that you still have so much to learn, like we see Mr. Knightley telling Emma constantly throughout the novel that he has more experience and does know more than her, you kind of have to have that like retrospect to understand that for yourself. And I think that's what we see happen to Emma throughout the novel, which is, I think, really nice to watch.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah. And then from a comedic perspective, I also really love Mr. Elton.
Yes.
Like he is not like my favorite character, but I think he adds a fun element to the novel, especially in certain areas that I'll talk about when we get into the into the spoiler section. But yeah, he is a fun guy, and I think I also like associate him now with the film portrayal of him with Josh O'Connor, and I think he did such a great job. So yeah,
I agree. I think Jane Austen does such a good job at making fools out of people, even the most despicable of characters. But I love it when it's lightly funny. Like there's just these character traits that are ridiculous, and she builds these wonderful, detailed characters around like a specific trait. And what do you think his character flaw? Oh, I thought of one.
I feel like he's quite arrogant, would be my thought.
Yeah. I was going to say narcissistic.
Yeah. Like I think he also has like a narrow worldview, but one in which like he views himself at the center of the world, and like he must be as liked by everyone else as he likes himself, which is like in a way you can admire that, like he's so confident in himself, but like he does get himself into some issues through that.
It reminds me of Emma, actually, as you say that. It's kind of similar characteristics. However, Emma has like concern for others. I think her relationship with her father is really adorable and surprising for her character, like how much she cares about him and how much she humors him with his like hypochondria.
Yeah, absolutely. Like she does have, although a selfish streak, she also like shows a lot of empathy and regret when she realizes that she has upset someone. Whereas I think Mr. Elton is kind of like the version of Emma without that sense of empathy. And like if they would have gotten together, I think that could have been a disastrous combination of just like a narcissistic bubble that would have been absolutely insufferable. So yeah.
Which is funny. I don't know if it's just funny considering how his story unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this kind of goes a little bit off topic, but I do think it's worth asking the question. So, do you like the Brontes as well? Completely unrelated to Jane Austen, but I feel like people do compare them often, so I'm interested.
So you're asking me this question? Yes, I love the Bronte sisters. I think if I turn it, I have like all of their, well, not all, there's more novels. This white section, there we go, on my bookshelf is Bronte sister novels. I studied them. They were my like thesis, actually, my senior capstone at university. So I have a deep appreciation for them, and I was thinking about them when you were talking about how you really like Gothic literature.
Yeah, I think my favourite Bronte novel is Wuthering Heights because of like how like Gothic it is, which I know that one's like quite a divisive novel. People seem to either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
I also do love Jane Eyre, but I haven't read as much Bronte as I would like to do. I definitely have not read anything by Anne. I definitely want to read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall at some point. Maybe after I finish the Austen read-along, I can dive into the Brontes.
Yeah, great next step, I think.
Yeah.
I'd say my favorite novel, which isn't as popular, is Villette. I did really enjoy Jane Eyre, but Villette is by Charlotte Bronte. And there's a lot of mystery and it's fun. It's really long, but very good.
I'll add that to my list. I definitely do need to read more, especially given the fact that I live in Yorkshire and that is where the Brontes are from. I've been to Haworth and to the Bronte parsonage, and it is incredibly beautiful, one of my favourite places, but I feel like I need to like represent the local authors a little bit more.
Reading their novels makes me want to go visit the moors, but also equally afraid of visiting.
They're not that scary. Like I was out in like the Yorkshire Dales today, which is kind of like moorland, and you know it's not that scary because there's not actually anything Gothic happening there. It's just mostly like farmers' fields and things like that. So not so scary, but very beautiful. Absolutely. Okay, so back to Emma. Sorry for that little detour, but it's always fun. So we've talked about characters. Is there anything about Emma and I guess the way that it's like structured that makes it particularly enjoyable to you? Whether that's something that you noticed like the first time around, or if it's something that like maybe came to you like rereading it and appreciating it. And if there's not, it's also fine to say, so don't feel like you have to make something up.
I think it's really interesting how just within the scope of Jane Austen, like the story starts out with a protagonist determined not to get married. Like it's very much, she's the one matchmaking for other people. And then mishaps within that and how it evolves to a different ending. But I'm not sure, like that was fun and exciting. I'm not sure though that I have a better answer for that question. Do you have?
No, I think that makes absolute sense. For me, this is something that kind of like I appreciated more reading it the second time around, so this time, and that was because I feel like unlike some of her other novels where we focus predominantly on the main character and don't get as much attention on the like romantic interest or like the potential like partners of hers, I feel like in Emma we get a lot of her interactions with quite a few different people, which means that you are like a little bit on your toes throughout. Like you don't necessarily the first time around know exactly where it's going to go, but I feel like you get to know, like for example Mr. Knightley almost as early in the novel as Emma, so I really like that you get to see other characters like evolve as much as she does. So that is something that stands out to me about this one.
And it is very community based. Like you have characters from different classes. You have like the Bates and the farmer that Harriet likes. Milton?
What's his name? No, Robert Martin. That's it.
Yeah. And you learn their daily lives. It's community based and well rounded. And I think it just is even more satisfying with how it ends when all those pieces are tied together.
No, I agree. I feel like it does have that sense of community more than some of her other ones, like in the sense that although Emma is like significantly higher class than most of the other characters, you see how she like fits into the community still and like the role that she plays there and how everyone responds to her presence. So yeah, really agree with that. Someone has asked the question about Landon, and I know you mentioned this earlier, but he hasn't.
No, he hasn't, but he wants to. He will, hopefully. As he will. I'm going to hold him to it, but.
Fabulous. Okay, so I think we'll dive into some of the like more in-depth themes. So just as a flag for anyone who hasn't read Emma all the way through and doesn't want any spoilers, we may end up getting into spoilers and specifics of characters and how they end up from this point onwards. So just a fair warning there. Okay, so you mentioned that you like how Emma is presented as a character who doesn't want to get married. I would love to talk about that because I think it has so much, like, so much to do with the entirety of this novel and what makes it so different from her others.
Yeah, I can't remember. Do you know? I know the movie adaptation. I love the first line, how it starts out. Hold on.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
I'm gonna read it because it like just describes her character in the sense that we're talking about. But Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her.
It's incredible because, like you say, from the very first line in the book, you know exactly how to understand Emma and how she exists in the world, and therefore how she views everything, because she has had such a comfortable and privileged existence. It is like such a like concise but like explanatory first line. I love it.
Yeah, and it says for the first 21 years of her life. So you know that something is about to vex her, something is about to unravel this perfect existence.
Yeah. So I do love that, and I love the fact that, you know, we understand from that as well, like her privilege, and I think that is obviously what makes her stand out from any of Austen's other protagonists, because I think most of her other protagonists would be considered middle class. We then have like in Mansfield Park, Fanny Price, who's obviously a little bit lower than middle class and is living in a middle class family, and so we have Emma sort of set out as a little bit different there, because she is, unlike the other protagonists, not having to look at marriage as like a economic prospect. Like, she doesn't need that. So marriage has probably more of a relatable context to like us nowadays, that we could view marriage solely as a expression of like love or like a commitment, rather than like, I need this marriage because it's financially suitable.
Which I did wonder about, and I meant to look this up, but in Pride and Prejudice, there's pressure on the daughters to get married to their cousins so that they can, their family can continue to live in their home that they've grown up in. And I wondered, Emma's sister was married to a man. How does the transfer of wealth work within the family? Because I thought that women couldn't inherit wealth in that way. So
Yeah, so I think basically, I'm sure it says it at some point in the novel somewhere, but I think because Emma's sister Isabella married Mr. Knightley's younger brother, and I think that automatically it might, if they don't have any other male relatives, go to Isabella's first son.
okay, so it didn't matter
Well,
what.
I think that like there was a sort of like understanding there that Emma wasn't at any risk of like losing her home or anything like that. But it is a fair point that, you know, she seemed like completely at ease there, and you'd assume because Austen had written previously about the fact that that wasn't possible for other girls, you know, like, or even in Sense and Sensibility, where the family are like all sort of kicked out of their house by the brother. Like, she's aware of that, so she obviously decided that wasn't the case for Emma. But yeah, they don't explain it necessarily like in so many details, like to make it super clear for us who don't understand like the wealth system of the 1800s.
Yeah. So she considers herself very much separate from everyday fears and worries of people of her time. And it makes her feel almost invincible. Like, she's wealthy, she's beautiful, she has nothing to worry about, and she's not interested in love because she doesn't need anybody else. However, she's very clearly interested in it because she wants to play matchmaker for so many
Yeah,
people in her life.
it's so fun as well to have like often the matchmaker character, because a lot of Jane Austen's novels have one, are like older women who are like married themselves and are either focused on marrying off their own children, or like have married their own children successfully, so like to meddle in other people's lives. And so to see like a young lady who isn't bothered about her own romantic prospects and instead wants to put everyone else into couples. Like, it's just so interesting because she kind of challenges that like typical like old lady matchmaker style, and also it makes her so unaware of like how people actually feel about her, because she is only thinking about her idealistic view of how things should be, which is fun.
Yeah. Are we in the point where we can talk about spoilers, or are there?
Yes, yeah, feel free, go for it.
You originally just asked me about Emma and how she isn't interested in becoming married. I just wanted to talk about that. I think like most of her character development happens through her failure in matchmaking.
Yeah.
And it's a really humbling experience for her. And she becomes like, she's originally so separate from her community. She's idolized, but through these mishaps, she comes to value other people's feelings, and she kind of realizes she's not right and perfect all the time. And I love that humble growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, she has to fail first in order to see, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be meddling so much in other people's
Yeah.
lives. And it's interesting as well because it starts with the, like, just after the successful pairing of Miss Taylor, who was her governess, and then she marries Mr. Weston. So we don't see like the matchmaking process there, and so I guess we don't know like how much of a role Emma really played in it, or if that's just her perception that she was responsible. And I'm guessing that based on her lack of success with other characters, that perhaps she wasn't as involved in that pairing as she like maybe would like to think.
It's really interesting. And to compare it to what we were talking about earlier, as far as how relatable she is, coming from the perspective of someone who's just graduated high school or started university, her big accomplishment was the pairing of those two, apparently. And then you said that real life experience is what humbles us and takes us down from that high. And that's what Emma has experienced, and her growth is just realizing that she doesn't necessarily know everything or know what's best for everyone.
Absolutely. So, shall we talk about her little obsession with Harriet and like the
Yeah.
project that she makes of poor Harriet? Because that is like a disaster from start to finish, I would say.
Yeah. I don't know how they stayed friends.
I know, I think it was only down to the fact that Harriet was so naive that like she was willing to allow Emma to assume that level of responsibility over her life, and the fact that she was kind of like without place in the world. You know, she didn't have family, she didn't have like a home or anything aside from the school. So I think Harriet was like quite vulnerable in that sense. And so when someone of such consequence as Emma then took an interest in her, she was so flattered that I think she was willing to let anything happen. Which, of course, Mr. Knightley, from the very beginning of that interaction, recognised as a bad idea because he knew it was going to boost Emma's ego in such a bad way.
Right.
Whereas like Emma either couldn't or was unwilling to see that fact.
Yeah, and Harriet was so excited to believe the narrative that Emma was writing for her and for her life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested, like, to think, I obviously don't know the answer, but like why Emma was so against Robert Martin as a prospect for Harriet's husband initially, because that was really where everything went wrong for Harriet, poor Harriet.
Well, she kind of saw herself as too far above him to be able to interact with him and his family. And I think she said in the novel that she would lose Harriet as a friend if Harriet were to marry Robert Martin. However, by the end, it doesn't seem like that's an issue. And
No.
they're still going to be friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think Mr. Knightley was more than happy to communicate with Robert Martin. Like, there was no issue for him there. And I think Emma had a rude awakening of like how snobbish she had been about things like that, and the fact that she allowed her own sense of like superiority to then impact like Harriet's potential happiness for like the rest of her life. So it was interesting to kind of see like how Emma, used her position to manipulate Harriet into making the decision that she didn't want to make.
Yeah, and you see that so much more in men or male characters. Like, I think Jane Austen was like so ahead of her time and a feminist. But I don't know, it's not a nice thing to have done on Emma's part, but it's interesting how, as a woman during that time, she felt like she could do that. She could have that much control over another person's life and make those decisions for other people.
Absolutely. And I do think, again, it shows her privilege, but her lack of like understanding how much more privilege she has than other characters. So Harriet, for example, could have been condemning herself by making that decision to like a life of like financial struggle, because there was no guarantee that she would get proposed to by another man, or that Robert Martin would, propose to her again. So like she really could have been, through listening to Emma, condemned to like a life of like, no consequence. Because as sad as it is to say, like marriage really was like such an important like social climbing thing for women at this time, because like you said, they couldn't inherit wealth, they couldn't make their own money except for being like a governess or something like that. So it was a struggle for women to turn down these marriage prospects. But Harriet was so clouded by her like admiration of Emma that she also allowed herself to forget that she wasn't Emma. Like she couldn't make decisions like Emma could. So it's very interesting.
I like the girliness too, like them getting excited over Mr. Elton and Harriet writing down his sermons. And I like how we get to see that girliness kind of excitement over love and possibility too.
Yeah, like Harriet kind of not contradicts, but like is different from a lot of Austen's protagonists, and obviously she isn't one. But like, for example, Elizabeth Bennet, she like is very pragmatic in her approach to love, whereas we see Harriet go through lots of like crushes, and we see like how quickly she can fall for someone and how like obsessed she can get. And I think she obviously is quite young at the time. I think she might be only like 17 or something like that. So it's fun to kind of see like how she just like throws herself into it. And it is another thing that I think it is relatable for like a lot of like young girls to just like like see a guy who you don't even really know very well, but you just like the idea of them, and like you talk yourself into really liking them, and you got this idea of what it is without actually any grounds for the relationship. And we see that a lot in Harriet, I think.
And the way she does it is very likable. Like I feel like in some other characters who go from one love interest to the next, we saw that a lot in Mansfield Park. With Henry, I think, just trying to convince everyone to fall in love with him.
Yeah, like he just wanted to know that people would like him. He didn't really care about the consequence either. He was just like had fun flirting with everyone.
Yeah, but Harriet is just this like there's this silliness and there's this just innocence with it.
Absolutely. Just a quick question here. I believe Emma wanted Harriet to marry Mr. Elton because, like Morgan said, she didn't want her to marry Robert Martin because he was too far beneath her in society for Emma to then consider being friends with Harriet after the marriage. Whereas because Mr. Elton is like the vicar and holds like a respectable job within the community, she could still easily communicate with like the vicar's wife, whereas she didn't feel she could do that with like a farmer's wife, basically. I don't think it was money necessarily, and I don't think Emma really pays that much attention to money as such. More so status and perception, I think, is what Emma is focused on.
Yeah.
I think characters like Emma are feminists. See, I'm not sure that I'd consider Emma a feminist. I think she wasn't necessarily like fighting for women's rights, and really she only saw things through her own perspective, which is fair enough for someone of her age. But I think she was doing something that we'd consider feminist, which is not rushing to get married, but that was only because of her own privilege, not because she had like a moral like stance against marriage, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I think Jane Austen is more ahead of her time. I said feminist just because she writes about really independent women and marriage for love a lot of times, which women, like you said, had no other choice. Marriage was often for wealth or status or just out of a means of necessity. And I like how in all of her novels, Jane Austen plays with that. She critiques it in like a gentle way with this big romantic story, but still you can kind of tell like a lot of it's the moving force, but in a way where Jane Austen isn't necessarily supportive of it, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So I don't think that Emma as a character could be classed as a feminist, but I think Austen's works undoubtedly are, especially given the time that they were written in, because although her characters all end up married, because that was just kind of like a given. I mean, we see that in, like, I don't know if you've read Little Women, but that is like a key part of that, where like Joe's own main character had to get married or it wouldn't get published, and I think that was true of publishing at the time. So her characters do end up married, but she doesn't just take the easy route to get them there. She really explores the context of marriage in society at the time and the institution of marriage and what it meant for women, regardless of their social class, and how their social class affected their view of marriage and the way that they approached the journey to it. So I think she had such an awareness of it, especially for someone who was never married herself. So like she just had such a clear awareness of it. And while Emma took a stance against marriage from like, I don't need to, so I'm not going to, I think Jane Austen possibly decided not to for like more political reasons.
And it's interesting because she takes a stance against it, but then she tries to marry these other people for reasons so accepted by society during Austen's time, and it doesn't work out, like Mr. Elton and Harriet, for status.
Yeah.
And then by the end, Emma ends up marrying for love, not out of necessity or anything, and that says something.
I'm not sure I'll be able to find the quote, but she does say it somewhere, that she basically says, like, I won't marry except for love, but I don't think I'm that way inclined. I think she says something along those lines.
Yeah.
Let's see. Probably won't be able to find it. I'm terrible at finding quotes.
Yeah, I thought while you're looking for it, I think it's interesting how in tune with her feelings and emotions Emma is as a character. She's very self-reflective, and she does study other characters' behaviors and personalities and relationships. She's very, very observant and does have this really incredible self-awareness. And I think she is honest with herself. Like, she doesn't want to get married, and that just evolves as she grows throughout.
Absolutely. You know what? I'm going to give up. I'm never going to find it.
I have so many pages folded and underlined.
Yeah, I fold pages with the thought that I'll definitely be able to find the quote I'm looking for, and every time I fail to do so. I need to like write a note with every single page that I want and like a little detail about the quote. But yeah, she basically just says, I'm not going to marry except for love, but then she doesn't think that love is in her future at the point that she says that. So it's interesting that like she is so in touch with her emotions that she recognizes at that point that she has never felt anything close to love, and then when she does and it just suddenly dawns on her, it's like this revelation. And like she is very like you say, honest with herself and not willing to do anything that doesn't feel completely right for her, which I really like admire.
And that's something that I really liked about her with Frank. Like, there is something, we can get into it if we want to, but there's this expectation that they will end up together, and she's very excited at the idea of him. I can't imagine how boring like country life was with her small community. It's the same thing every day, and there's this exciting young attractive man that she could fall in love with, so she kind of wants to, but she's against, I don't know. And yet throughout it, she, in her inner monologue, she's like, I'm enjoying this, but I actually don't think that I like him. She never makes she does make a fool of herself at one point with him, but she didn't. It's not like she fell for him and then it was revealed that he wasn't who everybody thought he was. It was, she never actually fell in love with him. And so the blunder of that moment of realization of his true character and what was going on behind the scenes didn't hit as hard.
Yeah, I think if I was Emma, I probably would have been like more swept up by Frank Churchill, because as a reader, I was like so excited by his like introduction, and like I was like, oh, this is a fun little prospect. And I like, for example, like I can tell Mrs. Weston would obviously love Emma and Frank to end up together, because obviously Frank is like her son-in-law and Emma is kind of like a daughter figure to her. So I feel like she would have loved that to happen. And I also really enjoyed seeing their little flirtation, and I think it was because they were both so like, I guess, a little bit blasé about it. Like they were both very like flirty but like playful with each other, and it never felt too serious, so you could tell they were both just having fun with it. And I think because Emma's, again, like her social status meant that she wasn't relying on the match, she could just have like fun with it, and I really liked seeing that play out. Again, similarly to how Mr. Elton in my mind now is just Josh O'Connor playing him, I love Callum Turner, who plays Frank Churchill. I've also seen him in, he plays Anatole Kuragin in the BBC War and Peace adaptation, and he's a bad boy character in that as well, and he's just got a bit of a charm to him, and I think that brings a lot to Frank's character for me anyway.
And I'm really, really bad at pop culture, so I don't know names, and we'll talk about the movie later, but I did just want to say my favorite character in the movie is Miss Bates, and it's
Miranda,
who plays Chummy and Called the Midwife.
Oh,
she does such a good job. I love that.
So she is just incredible. I don't know if you've ever seen, so Miranda started out on her own like sitcom called Miranda. So she has like a series, and it's all about her as like a 30-something-year-old single woman who she owns a joke shop with her best friend, and then she's kind of in love with her friend from when she was younger called Gary, and he owns like a restaurant nearby, and she's very posh, and like it's such a fun show. And then of course I love her in Call the Midwife as well. So she is like, I think the perfect Miss Bates. Like she really is like wonderful at that.
Yeah.
So Frank Churchill and Emma, I feel like there's so many different romantic connections to talk about, because then you think we have Emma and trying to set up Mr. Elton and Harriet. We have the revelation there. Then we have Emma and Frank Churchill, and then she goes off him, and then she thinks that she's setting up Harriet and Frank. Little does she know something else is going on, and Harriet's interested in someone else. Then Emma realizes she has feelings for someone finally, and there's a whole mess. So a lot of these romantic connections are so interconnected that it is like hard to talk about them in a coherent way. But how did you feel about Emma? So you liked the sort of experience of her and Frank Churchill. How did you feel when she then decided to make Harriet and Frank a prospect?
I don't want to say annoyed, but I wasn't really that into it. I was like, if Mr. Elton didn't work out, what makes you think that Churchill will work out? But I did like how the idea dawned on her when Frank rescued Harriet from the gypsies, or I don't know what it was. It's the people that swarmed her, and maybe Emma was swept away in that romantic story, like he saved Harriet, or maybe that she had decided before then,
and that like confirmed it.
I don't know,
because then at that point, I think so that followed just after the dance, and Mr. Knightley had just danced with Harriet, and then the following scene we have then Frank rescuing Harriet, and then Emma and Harriet have this conversation where Harriet basically talks about how she can't believe she ever was interested in Mr. Elton or in Robert Martin, because she now realizes that she deserves a gentleman, because Emma has boosted her ego so much. And then they have a miscommunication because they don't talk in so many specific terms. So they just talk about being rescued. To Harriet, that is being rescued from being stood on the sidelines at the dance. But to Emma, she assumes it's like the physical rescue by Frank. And I think that miscommunication is so interesting.
Yeah, I remember, I think at this point, maybe I was annoyed because I really liked Mr. Knightley and I could see how they were confused and miscommunicating, and Emma wanting Mr. Churchill around, Frank around for Harriet, made Mr. Knightley feel like Emma preferred Frank over him.
Yeah.
And I just felt endlessly frustrated by that.
Yeah, it is like, you can just, it is, I think that the humor of this book, a lot of it comes from the miscommunications. And there are so many. It's like a web of just like, if people were just clearer with their words, none of these problems would have happened. But there's just so much like subtlety of like, they think that they're being clever by like slyly doing things, but by doing that, they just open themselves up for miscommunication.
And also, I think about this all the time when I'm reading during this time period. Dating, I don't know if that's the right word, but matchmaking, it would be so difficult during that time because you can't, socially, you're not allowed to like actually talk to somebody, or even, you can't interact. It's like, oh, they looked at me, they must be in love with me. Or like, you have to be such a good mind reader. I can see where there's so much room for these miscommunications and confusion.
Yeah, it is like, you couldn't just be like, yeah, I fancy you, let's get together, let's go on a date. It's like, it had to be so much more calculated or driven by like one of your superiors or your elders, because they were like managing the matchmaking. So it was like a lot more difficult. And then you can see someone like Harriet, who is being led by someone who she views to be her superior. You could see why she was like swept up in it and how things were miscommunicated, because she was so unfamiliar with the way that this worked in like upper class society, because she just would have never been exposed to it. So I think it's interesting how she does allow herself to be so led by Emma's cues. But really, though Emma is, higher class and, she is educated and, clever, but in terms of like love and life experience, she didn't have that experience. Like, she'd never been through courtship, so she was leading, it's like the blind leading the blind. Like, she was just telling Harry what to do, but she had no idea either, which is funny. I feel like I've skipped over the car crash that was the Mr. Elton revelation, and I do want to talk about that before we go towards the end of the novel. So that is one of my favourite quotes of the entire novel, and I will have to find it.
I'm not sure you're talking about a quote from him or a quote from Emma.
A quote from him.
It's really wonderful. I can summarize. I meant to do like a little short summary of Emma before we went into the details too, so that people can maybe refresh their memories if it's valid. But I don't know. Emma, do you want to read your quote?
Okay, I'll read my quote, then you can summarize. Okay, so this is, they're just leaving, I think, the Weston's house when it's like snowing, and they're going back to the house. Emma ends up in a carriage with Mr. Elton, and then she says, she found her subject cut up, her hand seized, her attention demanded, and Mr. Elton actually making violent love to her. Availing himself of the precious opportunity, declaring sentiments which must already be well known. And obviously that just means he's like passionately professing his love, but the phrasing just makes me laugh every single time.
Yes. And again, the most recent movie adaptation does it so well. I haven't seen the original one, or I don't know if it's the original.
No, me neither.
We need to.
I know, I do need to, but equally I'm like so attached to like our version, and I'm like, nothing could ever beat it. And I just love all of the castings. I think they're so incredible, and it's just amazing. But I will definitely watch it at some point, and then maybe like watch the current one straight after as like a direct comparison.
That sounds fun. But yes, Emma declares that she does not need to get married. And then she is lonely after her governess is married off and leaves. And she finds a friend, Harriet, who goes to a school nearby, I guess, but does not have parentage. She has a mysterious father who may or may not be wealthy. And Emma and Harriet become best friends. And Emma decides to set Harriet up with Mr. Elton as a way to pass time. I guess they were all bored. And it goes horribly. Mr. Elton ends up falling in love with Emma. And the whole time Emma thinks that Mr. Elton loves Harriet, but he just wants to be near them to be with Emma. And that's where that quote comes in, is when Mr. Elton is professing his love for Emma.
Yeah, because he obviously believes, like, Emma's been very friendly to him, and he thinks that she's been friendly to him because she likes him. He doesn't realize that she just was being friendly so that she could, get him and Harriet together. And again, another major miscommunication. And then he just takes this opportunity to profess his love, believing that she is well aware and that she also likes him. So it must have been a real shock to poor Mr. Elton to realize that that wasn't the case. And if there was, a less confident woman, might have just gone along with it and thought, well, so I'm marrying now, I guess. But she was like, no, not me, not today.
Yeah, and she was like, how could you ever think that I liked you? Which was harsh. So then she has to break the news to Harriet that Mr. Elton, who she convinced Harriet to love, actually loves Emma. And Harriet's heartbroken, but in a silly teenage kind of way, I guess. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Elton is also heartbroken, but more just his ego.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, Mr. Elton finds his wife, the lovely Mrs. Elton.
Yeah, and I think they are perfect for each other. It is so satisfying seeing him paired with someone that is similarly arrogant.
Like, she is insufferable. Like, she really is awful. Seeing how she likes to just take control of everyone, and just she has this inflated sense of self, this inflated sense of her hometown and the place that her sister, I think, lives, and she just loves it, and then constantly tries to bring down the place that she's moved to by comparison, which is very interesting. But there's one section where she is trying to orchestrate a day out at Mr. Knightley's house, and then she is trying to invite people and trying to tell Mr. Knightley who to invite, and he's like, stop right there, because there's only one woman I'll allow to send invites to my house. And then Mrs. Elton gets really offended because she thinks he's talking about Mrs. Weston. And then Mr. Knightley's like, no, I'm talking about the future Mrs. Knightley, so please calm down. And I just love that.
So satisfying. And then again, just so furthered my appreciation for Mr. Knightley.
Yeah, because he isn't that sassy. He's usually quite, controlled and very measured, but then he just has these very quick remarks that are just enough where he's not being rude, he's just being completely honest and well within his rights to say things, but his words just seem to have such impact because he's not someone who's usually quick to make those kinds of remarks. So yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So talking of that gathering at Mr. Knightley's house, I think that is the pivotal point in the novel for me, at least in terms of Emma and her development. So I think that'd be fun to talk about because they're obviously out for the day at Mr. Knightley's, they're having a picnic, and then Emma and Frank, who are now just friends. Emma is not interested in him romantically anymore, but she's still enjoying the fact that he seems interested in her, and so she's enjoying that. He's boosting her ego, and then she makes a rude comment to Miss Bates about how she talks too much and that she's boring, which is obviously very hurtful. And Emma had just kind of gotten a little bit too excited with the day and didn't consider the impact of her words. And then Mr. Knightley sits Emma to one side and says, I can't believe you'd be so thoughtless as to do that to someone who is your elder, who is your social inferior, and just who is so kind. And I just thought, again, he is just someone who uses his words really carefully, and he saw that this was an opportunity where he had to tell Emma what he really thought, because otherwise he was doing both Miss Bates as someone he respected and Emma as someone who he cared about a lot a disservice by not telling her the truth. So I love that.
Yeah, this part of the novel I would consider my low, or just like there were high hopes. I think Emma at this point had realized that she might have feelings for Mr. Knightley.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same event, Harriet's feelings deepened for him, and there's confusion. And I obviously was attached to Emma and really disappointed in how she treated Miss Bates.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just uncomfortable. And I knew that Frank was being a fool. Jane, who we haven't mentioned.
Yes.
There's so many. There's so many characters, but Jane is Miss Bates' niece, and she's an orphan, and is it okay to say she's secretly engaged to Frank Churchill?
Plot twist.
Yeah, they're secretly engaged, but Frank is pretending like he has feelings for Emma. I'm really glad Emma doesn't have feelings for him. But yeah, it all kind of culminates at this picnic, and you kind of walk away from that with Emma being lectured by Mr. Knightley, and he's totally right in everything that he says, but you feel like he doesn't like her like Emma, or he's just really disappointed in her, and that whole thing feels almost helpless at that point.
Yeah, I think you as the reader get a feeling for like the shame and embarrassment that Emma probably feels in retrospect, knowing like how she made herself look and how she made Miss Bates feel. And like, I think at that point, you're obviously, again, like if you were ever in doubt that Emma was a good person, just sometimes misguided, I think her response to that, and then the way that she goes to try and make amends with Miss Bates, I think shows you that she is just someone who's maybe a bit youthful and misguided, but ultimately a good person. But equally, like, you can just feel like, I don't know if you ever got told off by a teacher at school and just felt like so like uncomfortable. I feel like that's how Emma must have felt being like scolded by Mr. Knightley.
She'd had blunders previously, but there was always something kind of funny about the blunder, like Mr. Elton confessing his love for her. That was just very funny and overdone. But this is just, she's made a big blunder, and you sit in the shame with her. That was a really good bit.
And like normally her and Mr. Knightley have this like back and forth, and you know, like they, you know, both like chiding each other, and you know, just like sort of there's a bit of banter between them, and nothing ever seems too serious, no matter whether there is like crosswords or anything. Whereas in this instance, you know, there's no room for a comeback from Emma. She just has to accept what he's saying and, you know, do with that whatever she wants, but there's nothing she can really say to alter the situation. It just is what it is, and it is like difficult to read but so integral to like the novel. And I think it's at the point when Mr. Knightley recognizes Emma has acted upon his words and has made amends with Miss Bates that he realizes his like the extent of his feelings for her, because he recognizes that she's not shallow or you know, like unfeeling. She is willing to take criticism and like use that to make herself a better person, which is very important, I think, to him.
Yeah, and it's a very pivotal moment in Emma's character development as well. She's very humbled by her mistake and how she was just toying with others for her own fun at that point. Her and Frank are bored and just decide to be terrible because of it. So yeah, Emma makes amends with Miss Bates, and that's really good. I'm not sure, and I think it's around that same time that it's revealed that Frank and Jane are engaged.
Yeah, let's talk about Frank and Jane. So more specifically Jane, because we haven't really talked about her. And though I wouldn't describe her as an antagonist, in Emma's mind, she is at the beginning of the novel. Like Jane Fairfax is like her exact age, and Emma is sick of Jane Fairfax being so well respected and well liked and so moral and perfect, and that everyone expects them to be friends because Emma doesn't like her. And actually, there's probably no reason for Emma to dislike Jane other than the fact that other people like Jane so much, which I think just shows Emma's like the fact that she's like so used to people liking her a lot that when someone else who is like her comparable age and potentially like her competition is like the same level as her, she feels very threatened by it.
Yeah, and Jane is everything that Emma isn't, or at least Emma wants so badly to be accomplished and admirable, really, but she isn't a master at the piano, and she draws, but not to, I don't know. I mean, I thought her drawings in the movie were good, but the level that was expected of women of her class during that time. And Jane is all of these things. Like, she's very experienced in playing the piano, and she is an artist, and she's quiet and well-spoken. Oh, I think Landon might have gotten home, so there might be a disruption, but you can pick up from here.
No worries. But yeah, so it is, like it's interesting because I think it kind of shows how we each see in others what we lack in ourselves. So like Emma recognizes the things that she sees as her shortcomings, and because she usually is so confident, I think that her response to that naturally is jealousy and therefore resentment, rather than like acting on it or just admitting that like, yeah, I'm not the best at everything. Like, she struggles to do that and therefore like chooses to point out the things in Jane that she says that she doesn't like, but really she probably just wishes that she had herself. But likewise, Emma has something that Jane could never have, which is family status or wealth. Like, she has those things that are far more important, I suppose, in the sense of like Emma's privilege and ability to do whatever she wants regardless of her skill set, whereas for Jane, who thinks that she may have to be a governess and make her own way in the world, like the fact that she is skilled is more of a necessity to her. So it's, again, I think just shows like the flaws in Emma's character and her like youthful naivety, that she doesn't recognize that she should maybe feel glad for Jane that she has those talents because they'll be useful to her because she'll need them, rather than just being jealous that she doesn't have them just because she wants them.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to see that, but something that I also think, like, the one negative side to Jane's character, I think, and I don't necessarily think other people talk about it so much, is the fact that she allowed herself and Frank to manipulate Emma, which I think is cruel because they didn't know that Emma wasn't truly going to fall for him. And I know that Jane was willing to give things up with Frank eventually, and she thought that she was going to go off and be a governess and leave that all behind. But equally, like, they knew that they were like deceiving people, and that in presenting himself as like a young bachelor, that there was a likelihood that something would start between him and Emma. And I think that is not really talked about so much, but I do think Jane let herself down a little bit there by not.
Yeah, maybe it's the same kind of jealousy. Like, maybe cruelly, Jane wanted Emma to experience that heartbreak because Emma had everything that Jane didn't have. So
Yeah, quite possibly. And also, like, perhaps she, I don't know, maybe like in a way she thought like that Frank really was interested in her at a certain point, and therefore she was like, well, maybe this is just another thing that Emma will get that I don't have. And we don't, because we don't see things from her perspective and we don't understand the depth of what was going on there. Like, we don't know exactly what motivated her, but I do think it's surprising, given how moral she is elsewhere, that she allowed that to happen, because it doesn't seem to go with her character. But equally, it was just maybe something that was a necessity to her. So yeah,
a retelling from her perspective would be so interesting. I wonder if one exists.
Yeah, like that would be really interesting, because she is, going through, I think, what a lot of Austen's protagonists are, which is, courtship and trying to make her way in the world. She is maybe more comparable to some of Jane Austen's other protagonists as well, in the fact that she isn't of a super high and comfortable social class, and that she likely will need to marry in order to make a life for herself. So I think it would be very interesting to see how she perceives Emma throughout the novel, and whether she has the same level of like animosity towards Emma that Emma has towards her. Like, it would be interesting to know if the feeling's mutual or not. But yeah, I do think it's nice that they kind of like reconcile towards the end and like make their peace. Well, at least Emma makes peace with Jane, because she was the one that was holding the grudge for some reason.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I suppose the very next thing, and probably one of the last things to discuss, is the ultimate pairing of Emma and Mr. Knightley and how that all pans out. Like, I just think this is one of my favourite Austen pairings, and for the reason that I said right at the beginning, in terms of structure, I love that we know Mr. Knightley from the very beginning of the novel. And so we see the foundation of their relationship and we see them evolve. And although we get evolutions of other romantic relationships, we sometimes have like a protagonist introduced, and then like a little bit later on we get like some romantic partners, and then things kind of like become clearer towards the end. Whereas I just love that we have the like consistency of their relationship all the way through, although it's not romantic the entire time.
Yeah, and just the consistency or steadfastness of Mr. Knightley himself. Like, he's very who he is at the beginning and is consistent all throughout. And anytime there's any doubt about his character, it's whether or not he's in love with Jane at first and then Harriet, and it's all speculation by other characters. And there's only that speculation because he is so kind towards other people. So it's so satisfying to see him end up happy with Emma.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And as well, like, you don't, although you think he may be in love, he would like only marry for love, because that is kind of like how he is presented, as like being so kind to these other girls. And so you think, okay, he's making decisions based on like true emotion. So I think you have a lot of respect for him there, because he's not, I think Mr. Elton, for example, wasn't in love with Emma. He was in love with the idea of marrying someone of such high status and what that would mean for him. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think with Mr. Knightley, whether or not he would have been in love with Jane, Harriet, or Emma, I think you can truly believe that he would only make a decision based on like true feelings, which I think is really lovely.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, I do think it's interesting, like Emma's response to her revelation that Harriet loves Mr. Knightley. Like, I think that is very telling about Emma's like snobbery, like the fact that it is still with her, because she's like absolutely shocked that Harriet thought she could ever end up with someone like Mr. Knightley, which is very interesting.
And Emma herself planted that kind of seed and that kind of
thing. She's like, she realizes that she was kind of like the potential maker of her own destruction.
Yeah, and you come full circle, and that's like the biggest amount of growth for Emma, is her realizing her like the consequences of her actions. And then like I think there was a point where she accepted that Harriet and Mr. Knightley might end up together, and she was like, okay. And then she finds out that Mr. Knightley actually loves Emma, and she herself has to break the news to Harriet in a humbled way.
Yeah, it is like full circle for everyone. Like, I think we see in a lot of characters, like, there are rash judgments. We've already talked about how there's a lot of miscommunications, and this is a book where we see so much growth in almost all of the characters. Like, you really see a lot of like maturing in everyone and their relationships with each other, and also their understanding of themselves. And so Emma, as we've said, goes from being like against marriage completely to recognizing like that she has like real deep feelings for someone that she's known for basically her entire life, which is just like really lovely to see her like open herself up to that like emotional vulnerability, which is something that I think by maintaining the role of the like fixer-upper, she kind of removed herself from any emotional vulnerability, because she was only putting the hearts of other people on the line and never herself. And so at the end, she has to accept that vulnerability, because that is what happens when you open yourself up to love, which is really nice.
Yeah. And then again, her relationship with her father, I think that was part of it too. He struggles so much with change, and she didn't ever want to be the cause of his heartbreak or worry over change.
Yeah.
And it's sweet how in the end, Mr. Knightley decides that they can all live together. It's kind of funny, but
yeah, like not only live together, but live together at like their house instead of at his house. So that was again like, you know, they like completely flipped convention on its head, and it was just like, I think showed how they were a perfect pair, because not many men, especially of the time, would be willing to put their wife's father above like anyone else's, you know, like sort of hopes and dreams. So like his respect for that and his knowledge that Emma wouldn't sacrifice her dad's happiness is like really lovely.
yeah, and again, ahead of their time, perhaps. I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think it really is. It just like is such a fabulous pairing, and just like I think one of my favorite Austen conclusions, and I think that's just because I mean I love the whole book so much, and I find these characters, every single one of them, so easy to be invested in, and you really are just like hooked and want to see what happens to everyone. So I think when you get that conclusion and everyone seems to be like happy, or at least have gotten what they truly deserve, it's just really like a satisfying end to the book.
So satisfying and just enjoyable throughout.
It is. It's incredible. I mean, I definitely see myself rereading this book over and over again because it's just amazing. Though, as we've established, there is just so much to say about this book. I feel we've done like a pretty thorough job.
Yeah.
Of
sorry. I mean, yeah, we have done a really thorough job, but there's still so much that we could talk about.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's the case with every Austen, and this one in particular has such a big cast of characters that you could go so deep into certain bits and just like talk for hours about it. But I think we've done quite a good job of covering most of the major bases, and we've been talking for well over an hour. So much to say about Emma. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap things up?
I feel like we've touched on everything, like the movie adaptation and
Yes.
Austen and her progressiveness. But I mean, I could talk about anything. I do feel satisfied, though.
Yeah, I feel like throughout you kind of feel like, oh, I've touched on this bit, I need to go back to this bit, and then like gradually we've pulled all those pieces together, just like Austen does with all of those like webs of miscommunication. She ties everything up, and not to compare us to the wonderful Jane Austen, but I think we've done a good job as well.
Yeah. Do you feel satisfied? I know that this is your favorite. I
absolutely do. It's been so wonderful to talk about my favorite Jane Austen with someone else who loves the book as much as I do. I really have had the most wonderful time.
Me too. And this is my first live, and I was extremely nervous, but you've
done an amazing job. I feel like you were far more like eloquent than I was on my first live show.
Yeah, oh, on your first live show. Okay, maybe I haven't seen that, but you were so well spoken. I'm very impressed.
Oh, thank you. You are too, just to clarify.
Thank you. I guess you want to ask anybody if they have any questions or something?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone feels we've missed anything absolutely crucial, then let us know and we can get to those questions just before we finish up. But it seems like other people have enjoyed the show as well.
Oh.
Thank you all for joining us. It's been so, I always love like my favorite part about live shows as opposed to normal videos is like that the live interaction and having other people get involved as well. So thank you all for joining.
Oh my gosh, this whole time I didn't realize I could see the comments. Wow.
Wow, that's a revelation for your next live show.
Yeah, I guess so.
Life changing.
Oh, yay.
Okay, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining, and of course thank you most of all to Morgan for joining me and making this live show so much fun. And the next live show for the All About Austen read along will be in mid-January, and that one is about Northanger Abbey, but details for that can be found on the Discord, which is always linked down below, as is Morgan's channel, which I would highly recommend checking out if you haven't already. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.
Thank you so much.